Before you stands an officer of the Red Army, a holder of numerous orders, a hero of the patriotic war, a Soviet intelligence officer with an impeccable reputation. And now a Soviet diplomat in Turkey, an inept spy, a vengeful and malevolent person, a careerist willing to do anything, any meanness for praise. And now an English spy codenamed Hero, the person who reconciled two superpowers at the most tense moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The person who saved the world from nuclear war. Whose story do you want to hear? And what if I tell you that it's all the same person? In our minds, we already have the image of a spy, a special agent, a charismatic intellectual, knows many languages, shoots all kinds of weapons, capable of getting out of any situation. But we know that the world is not that simple.
Most important Soviet spies.
Today we continue the espionage section. About double agents who sided with the enemy, about spy traitors, about the most notorious failures of intelligence services. But most importantly, every traitor to one country is a hero to another. And today, you will decide for yourself whose side you are on. June 1960, the height of the Cold War. In the capital, on the Moskvoretsky Bridge, two American students were taking photographs against the backdrop of the Kremlin when a stranger approached them. The man handed over an envelope and, in English with a Russian accent, asked the students to deliver this envelope to the US Embassy in Moscow. The students agreed. That same day, the envelope was on a desk at the US Embassy in Moscow. What's in the envelope? The letter detailed how, a month earlier, an American reconnaissance aircraft, U-2, had been shot down over Soviet territory, piloted by Gary Powers, the very pilot who was exchanged for Rudolf Abel. From my previous video, be sure to watch it. After reviewing the letter, the Americans understood. The author of the message possessed secret information. The letter contained many details of that incident, known only to a select few. And the author wished to establish contact. The letter also included a proposal to mark one of the phone booths in the center of Moscow with chalk, where they would like to receive new information. The CIA gathered for a meeting and decided not to react. The Americans simply thought it was a KGB provocation. But 4 months later, the stranger appeared again. Leningrad, a hotel room. Here, an employee of the British Embassy named Merriman settled. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. A man about 40 years old entered the room. He silently approached the radio receiver and turned the volume up to full. Music played in the room. Then he turned to the Englishman and handed over a package of papers. Take the package to the American Embassy. For a while, the Englishman was in shock, but he quickly pulled himself together. Before his trip to the USSR, Merriman was well briefed on the possibilities of KGB provocation. He rejected the offer. He did not take the package and expelled the stranger from the room. The second attempt to establish contact also ended in failure. A couple of months later, a third attempt was made. Dr. Harrison, the director of the Canadian Geopolitical Research Program, was introduced to a KGB agent during his trip to the USSR. Throughout the journey, this agent seemed to try to ingratiate himself with Harrison. He constantly criticized the Soviet system and sought dialogue. When the two entered the hotel, the man took more active steps. He approached the wall and tore out a couple of wires, claiming that this would help protect against KGB eavesdropping. He then proposed cooperation with Harrison. Impressed by the guest's candor, Harrison agreed. Thus began the story of the most notorious betrayal of the Cold War era. Where can one measure the gravity and vileness of his crimes? In the Soviet Union, such betrayal would not be forgiven. In the United States, this agent would be called a savior of humanity, preventing a Third World War. We've all watched spy movies where the protagonists are almost superhuman. But in reality, everything is much more prosaic. And now about the most absurd espionage failures. Josef Jacobs served in the German army during the First and Second World Wars. He was engaged in the underground sale of passports and was caught red-handed. He was sent to prison, where he made a deal with the German command. In exchange for freedom, he agreed to spy on the United Kingdom. It was decided to drop him over Germany from an airplane. The day came, and Joseph boarded the plane. At an altitude of 3 kilometers, he prepared to jump. It was his first jump. Joseph sat and dangled his legs out of the plane's hatch. At that moment, a strong wind broke both his legs. Nevertheless, Joseph jumped and even landed alive. Unable to move, all he could do was fire a shot into the sky. When the English soldiers arrived, they immediately spotted the parachute. A man speaking with a German accent. In his pockets, he had £500 sterling and 2 passports, as well as a stick of German sausage. Joseph is a famous person because he became the last person executed in the Tower of London. Andrew Dalton Lee, nicknamed Snowman, stole US space secrets. He was supposed to pass the information to the Soviet embassy and could think of nothing better than to toss a stack of papers over a fence. The most interesting part is that the Mexico City police arrested him for littering. During interrogation, he confessed to everything and turned everyone in. In 1944, German spies William Kalepa and Erich Gimpel arrived in the United States via submarine. Their task was to gather information on US military plans. For this, they were provided with $60,000, a huge sum at that time, weapons, documents, and much more. Upon arriving in America, Kalepa spent $1,500 on alcohol and women in less than a month. William seemed to have forgotten his purpose in America. Gimpel began to doubt that his comrade was devoted to Germany. He asked him to stop the parties and tried to put pressure on him. Later, Kalepa admitted that Gimpel annoyed him so much with his whining that he got the idea to contact the FBI and surrender, which he did. Both were convicted. Gimpel was released in 1955 and Kalepa in 1960. CIA officer Harold James Nicholson became a double agent and began collaborating with the Soviet Union for one reason. He was denied a request to be assigned to Kuala Lumpur, where he hoped to get a house with a pool for free. It was after this refusal that he started trading secret data. FBI agent John Navarro was an expert in body language, and thanks to his skills, he managed to catch a spy in the United States. For a long time, he had been surveilling a person suspected of espionage, but nothing could be uncovered. One day, while reviewing surveillance camera footage, he examined a moment where the suspect entered a flower shop. He immediately realized that he was looking at a Soviet spy. The fact was, he noticed how the man was carrying a bouquet of flowers. According to him, virtually anyone in the United States would hold the bouquet with the flowers facing up, whereas the suspect had turned the bouquet upside down and carried it behind his back. As Navarro noted, this is something done only in Europe. Try to remember how your loved ones carry bouquets. On the 30th of December in 1961, a young woman emerged from the entrance of a building on Kutuzovsky Prospect. This was Janet Chisholm, a citizen of the United Kingdom. At that moment, a KGB operative was monitoring her. Chisholm was the wife of an intelligence officer, the second secretary of the British Embassy in Moscow. The woman headed to Tsvetnoy Boulevard, bought a kilogram of apples there, and then went towards the square. The KGB officer noted that Chisholm constantly checked if she was being followed. Upon reaching the end of the street, she abruptly stopped, turned around, and walked quickly in the opposite direction. She then turned into an alley and entered an unfamiliar building entrance. A few minutes later, the KGB observed her coming out of the entrance. He started to discreetly follow her, and something strange happened. At that very moment, a man, solid middle-aged and wearing a grey coat, emerged from the same entrance. He looked around and headed in the opposite direction. Along the way, he constantly looked back. All of this seemed suspicious to the operative, and in his report, he detailed this episode and the man who came out of the alley. Surveillance of Chisholm continued. Several weeks later, on the 19th of January in 1962, a KGB officer was again following her on Arbat. At some point, the woman suddenly turned into an alley, and there, in a phone booth, the KGB agent saw that same man again. Passing by the booth, the Englishwoman went into the nearest entrance. A minute later, the stranger hung up the phone and followed her into the same entrance. Inside, they stayed for about a minute and then exited, heading in different directions. The KGB officer followed the man. With quick steps, he reached the nearest stop and jumped onto a departing trolleybus. The operative was following him. The man constantly checked if he was being tailed, looking back and suddenly stopping. Losing the stranger now was simply not an option for the agent. The KGB officer followed the man all the way to the final destination. The man entered the building of the Council of Ministers of the USSR for the coordination of scientific research. Soon, the identity of the unknown was established. He turned out to be a person with an impeccable reputation, a colonel of the main intelligence directorate, a war hero, and an experienced spy. His name was Oleg Penkovsky. Once the intelligence services of the United States and India joined forces to monitor China's nuclear program. The goal was simple. They needed to place a special sensor at the peak of the Himalayas. The intelligence services developed a spy device, spending a considerable amount of money on its development, but during the attempt to install it at the peak, it was swept away by an avalanche. FBI agent Robert Hansen, at the age of 22, was a Russian double agent. He managed to stay undiscovered for so long because the hunt for the mole was entrusted to himself. In the end, he was caught due to racism. Hansen often used an incorrect phrase, insulting the Japanese, and after some time, it was discovered that this same phrase was used by the double agent. This is how he was identified. FBI agent Earl Edwin Pitts sold secrets to the Soviet Union for $224,000, and most importantly, he hid all the money above the ceiling in his own office. It is said that once he even sorted the money by denomination during a meeting with colleagues. The spy Edmund Pope was caught red-handed. He handed over $30,000 for secret information about an underwater missile. But the interesting part of his story is different. In court, it was revealed that Pope kept diaries in which he recorded practically everything. Information about business meetings, conversations, results, phone numbers, names. His own diaries became the main evidence against him. The director of the Secret Service, Sir Stephen Lander, stated that during the Cold War, the department wanted to use a team of trained gerbils to catch spies. Agents learned from Canadian scientists that rodents could detect elevated adrenaline levels by focusing on human sweat. The plan was to place cages with gerbils near immigration desks at airports. A fan was installed on the passenger side, which would blow the scent of sweat toward the gerbil cage. If a person was excessively nervous, the gerbils would react. An experiment was conducted. Cages were set up, and the gerbils unmistakably caught all the aerophobes. Oleg Vladimirovich Penkovsky was a solid, respectable man. By the nature of his service, Penkovsky often attended receptions at foreign embassies. With admirable diligence, he strove for intimate friendships with foreign diplomats. Oleg Penkovsky was born in the Caucasus in 1919. He graduated with honors from a military academy and became an officer. His commanders noted his high discipline and diligence. Thanks to these qualities, he quickly climbed the career ladder. In 1943, he was sent to the front as a commander. He was wounded twice and at the beginning of 1944 received his first order for displayed courage and heroism. After the war, he entered the military academy, and from there he went to work in Turkey. There he served as the senior assistant to the military attaché of the USSR. He always knew how to negotiate, knew how to please people when it was necessary. His interaction with colleagues did not go well. They considered Penkovsky to be an ambitious careerist who placed his own self above the interests of the common cause. From the characterization of General Rubenko-Savchenko on Oleg Penkovsky, a vindictive and malicious person, an unparalleled careerist, capable of any meanness. It is said that even in Turkey, Penkovsky tried to make contact with Western intelligence services. He was returned to Moscow, but thanks to his acquaintance with important generals, he retained his position. And so, in Moscow, on the third attempt, he was finally noticed. On the orders of British intelligence MI6, businessman Greville Wynne invited a Soviet delegation along with Penkovsky to London. After his first visit to London on April 20, 1961, the act of recruitment took place. From this moment, Oleg Penkovsky was officially a traitor to the motherland. and at the same time one of the most valuable agents of British intelligence. After Penkovsky's meeting with Janet Chisholm, thorough surveillance was established over him. Penkovsky himself displayed extreme carelessness. Officers observed how the colonel photographed certain documents and worked with a radio receiver. He did all this right by the window or on the balcony. All of Penkovsky's actions were meticulously documented. All the routes that Penkovsky used for moving around the city were divided into blocks. Covert surveillance was conducted from concealed posts. At some point, counterintelligence intercepted the operation of a receiver transmitting Morse code signals in Penkovsky's apartment. Regular encrypted transmissions were recorded on air, intended for a certain opponent with the call sign number 163. Decoders quickly established that the signals were going directly to the CIA center in Frankfurt. It was then decided to secretly penetrate Penkovsky's apartment, search, and find evidence. His clothes were secretly treated with a substance that caused a rash. The colonel rushed to a doctor who invited Penkovsky's wife for the appointment. While she was in the doctor's office, the operatives took a key to the apartment from the woman's coat pocket. A duplicate was made right in the adjacent office, and the keys were returned. The search yielded incredible results. A cleverly constructed hiding place was found in the desk. There were Penkovsky's notes, phone numbers and addresses of foreign intelligence representatives in Moscow, various reports and photographic films, also 6 cryptographic notebooks, Minox cameras. More than once, Penkovsky aimed the lens of this Minox camera at secret documents to which he had access, and a note indicating the radio frequencies on which Penkovsky received instructions from foreign intelligence services. On October 22, 1962, 43-year-old Colonel Penkovsky was brought directly from the hospital to the KGB building on Lubyanka. Penkovsky arrogantly, even with a slight smirk, told the investigator at the time, "I'm an honest man, arrested by mistake." However, when shown the evidence from his own apartment, his demeanor changed. Penkovsky realized that the counterintelligence knew everything, that they had irrefutable evidence, and then he spoke differently. "I asked to interrupt the interrogation and give me some time to think alone, and then, I have overcome the fear of responsibility for my crime and am ready to tell everything." Penkovsky first detailed the initial meeting at the hotel with the British intelligence officers, where he was taught to use a portable camera, to create microfilm, and to use special copying paper. Penkovsky practically never left the military archives. He had round-the-clock access where he photographed almost all secret documents that came his way. He worked so actively and diligently that at some point MI6 agents asked him to stop, to slow down so as not to attract undue attention. But for Penkovsky, it was not enough. He requested a meeting with the British Prime Minister. The colonel was eager to prove his trustworthiness. In return for good work, the traitor to the motherland was promised a move to London, with housing and a good salary. The spy was even promised to retain the rank of colonel and was told he could choose which intelligence service to remain with, whether the British or the American. And then things reached the absurd. He wanted to try on foreign uniforms to see which one looked better. Specially tailored for him were British and American uniforms. He tried them on and, astonishingly, even photographed himself. Later, these pictures would be shown in the USSR as a vivid example of the fall of a Soviet man who betrayed his role. But what did they think of him in England? Here is the other side of the coin. Western intelligence services gave the colonel the codename Hero. The colonel became the most successful double agent from Western countries on Soviet territory. It is believed that he played a key role in resolving the Cuban Missile Crisis. He transmitted to the West detailed data on the deployment of Soviet missiles in Cuba and their capabilities. In the West, it is believed that ultimately Kennedy was forced to negotiate with Khrushchev, relying in part on that very information transmitted by Penkovsky. Thus, in the West, he is considered one of those who prevented nuclear war. Oleg Vladimirovich Penkovsky is accused of betraying the motherland while being on a business trip to London in April 1961. The trial of Oleg Penkovsky was open, with numerous journalists invited, and the process was extensively covered by state television. A phenomenal event for that time. On the 11th of May 1963, Oleg Penkovsky was sentenced to death. According to eyewitnesses, he covered his face with his hands and kept it there for a long time. On the 16th of May, Oleg Penkovsky was executed by firing squad in prison. And here's the question: who is he, Oleg Penkovsky? A traitor leaking secret information to the enemies, or indeed a hero who saved the world from a Third World War? Write in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching.